The Caribbean has always been a key partner of the United States, but recent tariffs imposed by the Trump administration threaten to destabilize that relationship. With global economic uncertainty on the rise, as JP Morgan forecasts a 60% chance of a global recession by 2025, the Caribbean's fragile economies face serious risks. These tariffs, ranging from 10% to 38%, are crippling the region's exports and throwing long-standing trade agreements into turmoil. In this video, let's dive into the history behind these tariffs, the immediate impact of new tariffs on Caribbean economies, and how regional leaders are responding to this crisis. Watch until the end to learn how these economic shocks are reshaping the future of the Caribbean's relationship with the United States and the world. Let's get started. The history of the U.S. tariffs on the Caribbean dates back to the 1980s, when the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act, CBERA, provided duty-free access for products from Caribbean countries to the U.S. market. However, the Liberation Day tariff plans essentially abolished the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act. While CARICOM is hit with a minimum 10% tariff across the board, the U.S. government needs to realize that CARICOM nations have consistently favored U.S. products. CBERA was not only a way for Caribbean exports to remain competitive, but also opened an avenue for American manufacturers who could find profitable markets in the region's small economies. The new tariffs also contradict other agreements, such as the Haitian Hemispheric Opportunity Through Partnership Encouragement or HELP Act, which gave Haiti duty-free access to American markets for certain apparel. These and other agreements were crucial in shaping the Caribbean economy. A tariff rate of 10% will negatively affect these markets and fragile regional economies and exacerbate social issues. In response to the new tariffs, Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador to the United States stated, quote, "Deterioration in Haiti's economic circumstances will only increase the Haitian impetus to seek refuge in the U.S." It's also important to note that the Trump administration's formula for calculating tariffs for every country is a tad concerning. A White House press release mentioned how, quote, "President Trump will impose an individualized reciprocal higher tariff on the countries with which the United States has the largest trade deficits." In 2024, the U.S. government had a $5.8 billion trade surplus with CARICOM, so why the baseline 10% tariffs? The calculations became even more abysmal when we examined the tariffs set for individual countries. For instance, how can the US have an unusually large trade deficit with a small country like Guyana? While the answer remains unknown, Guyanese products have been stamped with a massive 38% tariff duty. This came as a shock to the Guyana administration, which was expecting duty fees of 12%. The local government is convinced that this is a misunderstanding, asserting that the US government has extrapolated a trade deficit of $800 million to $4.2 billion for its calculation. According to their data, they exported nearly $3.4 billion worth of goods to the US and imported $2.6 billion. The Vice President is adamant that the confusion arises from the UN Commodity Trade Database's false numbers showing $5.5 billion exports to and $1.3 billion imports from the US. So, was this an innocent mistake or a calculated threat? The United States could also impose $1.5 million in fines on Chinese-built ships, an exercise that could end up costing $14,000 per container. The Guyana government is eager to negotiate with the North American giant to help rectify the situation. The country exports rum, crude oil, gold, timber, fish, and other agricultural products. However, exemptions exist for crude oil, natural gas, aluminum, gold, and refined energy products because the US is the second largest importer of crude oil and petroleum after China. Any disruptions in its supply chains could have disastrous consequences for its service and the recovering manufacturing sectors. But how will the baseline 10% tariffs against CARICOM members affect freight, shipping, and storage costs? That will surely add overhead to the oil industry. The US companies are the majority stakeholders in Guyana's oil production. ExxonMobil and Hess hold 75% of the interest in the Stabroek Block, which contains 11 billion barrels of oil. Ceasing production on their 600,000 barrels per day will also harm American companies. By the way, if you're finding this video insightful, please like and subscribe to our channel. This allows us to keep you updated about the latest news from the Caribbean. Thank you. Another oil-producing nation that is concerned about the effect of sweeping American tariffs is Trinidad and Tobago. The country's Prime Minister Stuart Young, engaged in an election bid, was asked how shipping duties and tariffs affect their energy exports like oil and natural gas. He expressed a desire to hammer out the details about the new duties, claiming he is, quote, prepared to sit across the table and negotiate regardless of who is on the other side. He also argued that, quote, we must ensure that we look at the other markets. It should be noted that Canada, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Brazil are the major oil providers. With its small population and relatively minuscule oil production, the Caribbean is a drop in the ocean. The US can easily pivot its imports to other countries, but the Caribbean cannot do the same. CARICOM countries exported $9.76 billion worth of goods to the US in 2023. However, the current tariffs skyrocketed the cost of doing business, as domestic businesses will lose market competitiveness due to high prices. How will CARICOM countries survive when their goods are more expensive for American consumers, including the Caribbean diaspora? For instance, inflation in Antigua and Barbuda could rise by 14%, with the country's president calling the tariffs the largest threat to the Caribbean region. Countries like Panama explain their, quote, efforts to exclude Panama from its application, while others, like Jamaica, are sitting still and monitoring the situation. The Jamaican Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade emphasized the need for clarity, saying they, quote, will update the business community and wider public accordingly. An official CARICOM statement read, quote, the focus on tariffs as economic weapons presents risks for Caribbean economies deeply dependent on U.S. trade. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, just went on a Caribbean trip in March. Did he simply miss the nuance of regional economics, or was he explicitly looking for chinks in the armor? Whether Caribbean leaders will be able to schedule another meeting amid the stock market's fallout remains to be seen. On Thursday, Trump contradicted his aides and expressed a desire to hear new offers for negotiating tariffs. It's important to mention that the sector-specific shocks of tariffs will carry far into the future. They will seriously hamper the living standards in the Caribbean, which will not help with the US government's recent crackdown on illegal immigration. Even if Caribbean leaders can negotiate a reduction in American tariff rates, how will these sweeping penalties affect the region's long-term relationship with the world's largest economy? Economic decisions of this pedigree directly impact the livelihood of the Caribbean's middle and working class. The fact that the US negated long-standing agreements is the cherry on the top. Since past behavior is the best indicator of future behavior, CARICOM will be wary of its future dealings with America. Ryan Strawn, Barbados' Minister of Finance, told his fellow Barbadians that his government has, quote, engaged actively with Afrexim Bank, the African Export-Import Bank, to be able to do more trade with Africa. Could we see a similar pivot across the entire region? Only time will tell. However, despite the challenges posed by these tariffs, the Caribbean's resilience and strategic alliances will help guide it through uncertain times. With strong leadership and innovation, the region will learn how to adapt and thrive. The future remains hopeful as the Caribbean navigates this economic shift. Now we want to hear from you. How do you think the US tariffs will affect Caribbean economies in the long term? Do you think CARICOM countries will be able to negotiate lower rates? Or is a shift to new trade partners the best move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, check out our video about the visa cancellation of over 50,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, and Venezuela by the Trump administration. If you found this video insightful, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Don't forget to share this video with friends who might be interested in the Caribbean's economic future. This is Caribbean Focus. See you in the next video.